What's going on, First Responder Nation? I'm John Griffith here with Fortitude Fitness, and today we're going to be going over the 3 fitness myths that people, for whatever reason, still believe is true. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into these. So number 1 is the myth that spot reduction is possible. And when we talk about spot reducing or spot reduction, all we're talking about, for example, is someone, say they want to decrease the amount of body fat that they have in their midsection so they can see, of course, six-pack underneath. So what they do is they do 100 sit-ups or 200 sit-ups, whatever amount in a day, every day, thinking that the more they do targeting that specific part of the body, the greater definition they're going to see and the less fat they're going to have there. So let's take a look at that, what the structure actually looks like. So this is looking at that midsection from a side view. This is going to be my back side of my spine, and then I have the front side. So this is going to be my skin. Right underneath that skin, you're going to have what we call the subcutaneous layer of fat. So of course, the more body fat you have, the thicker that's going to be, the more it's going to protrude outwards. So you have your subcutaneous layer of fat underneath, and then below that you have the actual abdominal wall, your abdominal muscle. And we'll kind of mimic that with what that six-pack will look like from the side. So you have your muscles, and then of course behind that you're going to have all your body structures, be it your rib cage and all of your vital organs and so on. So what people, when they talk about spot reduction, again, we focus on this layer of subcutaneous fat right here. They think that by doing more sit-ups or whatever abdominal exercise they're doing, that this layer of fat is going to start to decrease, it's going to get thinner, and then of course they're going to start to see those muscles underneath with more prominence. And in essence, it works to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is, if you're doing these exercises that start to develop and build those muscles to where they're getting bigger, if you have a relatively low relatively low level of body fat in that subcutaneous layer, then yes, those muscles are going to hypertrophy to where the point to where they may start to push out a little bit more. You may see a little bit greater definition on the surface. But the theory that you can spot reduce and target just this area of fat, say from my chest down to my belly button, that's simply not true. Now, the way to actually decrease that is going to be through overall body fat. Again, you can't spot reduce just in a certain area. It's going to be your body as a whole. And the best way to do that is to be in a caloric deficit. Now, I always recommend people, if they're going to try to lose weight and start to see more definition, relatively sustainable goal to go for is to be in a deficit of 500 calories a day. So if I multiply that by 7 days with a 500 calorie deficit, that's going to give you total deficit for the week of 3,500 calories. And that's exactly the amount it would take to lose 1 pound of body fat. So again, it is not possible to spot reduce and just target a certain area. If you are doing that and you start to see greater definition and you're under the assumption that spot reducing works, what you're probably seeing is just those muscles underneath starting to develop a little bit more, and that's where that definition is coming from. So that's myth number 1. Myth number 2 is that squatting, particularly deep squatting, is bad for your kneecaps. So let's take a look at another diagram here. So I have an individual standing up. This is going to be his head coming down to his spine. He has his hips, knee joint, and finally down to his feet. When we look at squatting, the greatest amount of stress and tension on that kneecap is actually going to be in those first 30 degrees of motion at the kneecap. So we look at this individual again. He's starting to come down into a squat. Of course, he has that forward lean. That kneecap starts to bend. And again, those first 30 degrees, that's where you're going to see the greatest amount of tension on that knee capsule. As you go further down into it, look at an individual that's in the full bottom of a squat. We'll say he's just below parallel here. That tension starts to transfer back into the hips. So again, as I'm doing squats, I always want to load those hips up, those glutes and those hamstrings and those quads. And again, as I go further down into it, that tension's going to decrease on my kneecap, and I'm gonna rely a lot more on my hips. So the fact that going deep in squats, people are under the misconception that the further you go down into it, the more tension is gonna develop on that knee capsule, and it's actually the opposite of that. Now, one thing with squats is if you have any type of mobility restriction in it, as you come down, if that spine starts to round, and a lot of times we focus on that lumbar, the bottom part, and then the top part, my cervical, down to the top part of my thoracic. Those are the two spots that are going to be most prone to rounding or overextension, and we want to try and avoid that, especially with squats and when I'm working with a high amount of weight in that movement. So this goes for all exercises, but particularly with squats, just go to where your mobility can handle. If you're not able to get to full depth, don't think that you have to do that just because you're limited by that mobility. Again, that mobility is going to be that limiting factor, and that's going to determine how far you actually go down in those squats. Of course, the goal with it is to start focusing on that mobility and flexibility, and over time eventually getting to the point where you can go below parallel. But again, that's going to be determined by your flexibility, mobility, and your technique and form on that. All right, so finally we come to myth number 3, which is that fad diets are the quickest way to get down to a target weight. And so what a fad diet is, it's simply a diet that's usually extremely restrictive in one or more certain food groups. So if we look at things like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet, which is extremely restrictive in the amount of carbs you can eat, things like this, yes, you will lose a lot of weight in the short term, but when we start to look at being able to adhere to these diets 6 months to a year, you see that a lot of people, they start to fall off within those first few months. And so yes, you're going to lose that weight initially, but a lot of people they rebound, so they're at their current weight, they go down, they do whatever fad diet it is, they get that weight loss, they start to feel good about themselves. And again, the problem with these fad diets is they're simply not sustainable in a lot of different times. And so what happens is they rebound either to that weight they initially started at, or a lot of times what we see is people actually go above that, and so they're actually at a heavier weight than when they originally started the diet. So again, what you're looking for is something that's sustainable with your diet, something that you can do in the long term, that's not going to be extremely restrictive, but you're still going to get those results, be it performance-wise or if you're looking to lose weight. And again, with that weight, you don't really want to go, in most cases, above 1 to 2 pounds a week with weight loss. So hopefully it helped. Hopefully it cleared up some misconceptions for you guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.